All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 169. I'm your regular co host, Bobak Ha'Eri, and we're here to talk about whatever issues you want to discuss in college football. Feel free to hit request. We'll get you up here. Lots of things going on. I mean, as you all know, lots of things going on. Here, I see John, you're up here. I'm going to go ahead and let you up. One of the things that struck me, we have so many things going on. Obviously, we had a show right after all the college football games on Saturday were finished, guessing what the playoff was going to be. I don't think anyone foresaw that they were actually going to drop Florida State, but they did. And we can talk about that. Otherwise, the portal's now open. There was a wild idea I wouldn't say wild, but coming from the NCAA, it was absolutely wild. Charlie Baker has apparently circulated a new idea, a new concept in how the association could be run. And this would be a radical shift. It seems to be acknowledging that the ongoing lawsuits are not going to go their way. And it seems like an opportunity for the NCAA to come as close to pay for play as they ever have. And we could talk about that. But lots of other things. Let's see here. John, you've been super patient. What's on your mind?
Hey, man. How you doing tonight?
Good. I'm amazed that how busy and how hectic it has been in the last 48 hours or so. But how are you?
Not too bad. I would say I'm vastly disappointed with the state of college football in the last 48 hours. With just with the injustice done to a Power Five team that even though that just because we went off power rankings is now not in the playoff. I think with you just mentioning what it feels like, at least to the G5 teams, like as a fan myself, feels like a pay to play, and which seems like a low entry fee right now to be in that pay to play can increase at any time, really eliminating a lot of those potential smaller schools. So I guess my question's a two-parter. Is the ACC now a G5 conference, and is the underdog story officially dead in college football? I hate to go so heavy, but that's just kind of the mood I feel like we're all in right
No,
now.
no, it makes sense. I know you're a big Sun Belt fan yourself, so this is hitting quite heavily on I think a lot of the programs with all the things going on. So I'm gonna start from Florida State only because I think that's the one that's been. We'll start with Florida State and then go to an even bigger question, a more existential question that you kind of touched on that's come up today. But as far as Florida State and the ACC, does it feel like a G4 right now? Or probably a G5, G6, G7. I don't know what G we were at. Maybe in the G7 at that point. It certainly feels that way for now, but I want to just put a couple of things in perspective there. First of all, Florida State, I mean, so many thoughts on that. I get what the committee did. They kept saying, Bill Hancock, I still remember 2 weeks ago, really, he jumped into a reply because typically Boo Corrigan is the one who talks during the media press conference, but he came out and was just like, hey, this isn't about most deserving. It's about best teams. And we were kind of like, yeah, ha, ha, ha. Yeah, we know it's most deserving. And then when the rankings came out on Sunday, I was like, oh my God, the madmen, they actually did it. And women, they actually went and picked what they thought were perhaps the best teams rather than the most deserving. Now, however you want to slice it, that's how it ended up. It's a travesty for Florida State and the ACC. The only positive note I can say is that, the biggest positive note is next year they'd be in. In fact, if you really want to go at it, Ross Dellinger did a really good article for Yahoo earlier this week where he kind of broke down how, if some of you may remember the alliance, that unfortunate concept where after Texas and Oklahoma announced they were leaving the Big 12 for the SEC, the Pac-12, Big 10, and ACC formed an alliance to try and protect their interests. They were so annoyed that they were delaying things. Whenever a new playoff suggestion would come up, they would delay it. And the playoff should have, if they hadn't done that, the playoff would have been actually, or the 12-team playoff would have actually already been here this year. So in a way, they kind of accidentally, inadvertently sowed the situation for Florida State that would not be present had the 12-team playoff been here. So all of that said, next year, the ACC champ will absolutely be in the playoff. Potentially an at-large team, we'll see. Although I'm not sure they need to have a stronger season than potentially they had this year. Although Louisville would still be on the outside. But all of that said, I mean, it is definitely a tough pill to swallow. It reminds me of some of you were around when the playoff began, 2014. We saw the Big 12 have two strong candidates get pushed aside, and that was a big thing. It was the one true champion era when they didn't have a playoff game, which allowed the NCAA to actually change the rules to allow a 10-team conference to have a playoff game. But they were bypassed for a 12-1 Ohio State team. Not to say there was anything weak about it, but that was a big deal when Baylor and TCU didn't make it in. In 2014, then we went through a bunch of years where it was fairly clear. I mean, the closest thing you could get to a controversy was that UCF year where they went undefeated. But I mean, it wasn't as big of a crisis. But this was a year where we had another crisis, and fittingly bookending the 14 playoff era. Again, just to emphasize, the ACC should be fine next season. It doesn't make it any better now. Now, going to your bigger existential question, what's being proposed right now for the NCAA? And this has been something some of you know has been proposed for many years now in some shape or form. The idea of and not always with the NCAA interested in it. There was always this push to see, will we have the biggest programs, not necessarily all of the P5. I mean, like the top of the P5, the most financially able of the P5, start their own division. I don't know. I still don't know why they would call it Division 4 for all those years. But now the NCAA has also proposed it due to the pressure, I think, from pending litigation. I'm not shocked by this idea only because the NCAA was trying to say, and they weren't lying. Like, yes, you're right. For Ohio State, USC, for Michigan, for some of these top programs, no problem. They'll be able to fund all of these things. But for some of the smaller programs, some of the not only in FBS, but even in some of the P5, the idea of funding some of these projects that would be required to be part of this new upper tier of the NCAA, because keep in mind, they still have to follow Title IX. So they would have to supply, I believe it's like half of the athletes in an athletic department and a minimum of $30,000 for each one in this trust fund. They're still trying to avoid saying they're paying them, but like this academic trust fund would be provided with $30,000 per year per athlete for at least half of the school's eligible athletes. That has to be split. So there's going to be, by the way, some women's sports teams are going to really actually see, some success out of this because they're going to have to spread that around. The problem is, and it's interesting too, some people pointed out there are teams like Stanford that have like 1 billion athletes. They have like 900 athletes. It's not even a low ball. Like it's a couple of teams in the Pac-12, a couple of teams spread around the country. And then there's somebody pointed out that like Auburn and I think another SEC team only had like 300 or 400 athletes. So it's going to be a significant number when you multiply that out to cover. And the question is, does that mean certain Olympic sports are going to get cut, or are they going to get shoved into kind of a new club team model? Club sports do exist. I mean, internationally, that's how a lot of, not just football, but athletics in all sorts. Like, I mean, I was looking at Britain. I was looking at some other countries just over the years because have really esoteric interests. But they tend to all be club sports in a very organized manner. So is that what's going to happen to some of the Olympic sports? Not sure. But John, I just wanted to let you. I know you wanted to reply to that, but since it was your question.
Yeah, so I guess to go off the Florida State point first, I understand the committee. They went for the rule exception, with a player's performance. I just feel like this sets such a bad precedent going forward. I mean, I understand. Yeah, we're going to a 12-team playoff, but what if next year or in any year in the future where the 12th team gets in and team 13, 14, 15 are arguing? Well, their star running back got hurt 4 weeks ago. Why are they in the playoff and not us? We have a more healthier team. I just think that sets a dangerous precedent. I think this new rule, this new potential, I'm going to call it what I think, a lot of people are going to call it a super conference or super division for football, in which, like you said, the money's, it's low right now, but I mean, that could change at any point. Like you said, it could potentially lead to, Olympic sports being cut so that they could give a bigger share that attract more athletes of, I would say, more popular sports on campus. I just feel like we're on such a dangerous, slippery slope right now that would really open a Pandora's box in this sport that we really, really cannot close from this point forward.
Yeah, and I just want to say one thing though: the NCAA proposing this new division isn't because they wanted to. It's because they know they're going to lose probably some of the litigation. And there was some interesting analysis. Again, some of you may know I have a background in law, but I know to look at other experts on areas of law I'm not super sharp on. Professor Michael McCann, who's a professor at New Hampshire and is one of the premier sports law writers, he does good analysis that he writes up for Sportico. And they had a good article today with the take on how to kind of view this NCAA proposal, and it may actually help them defend themselves for a change, because even when the Supreme Court unanimously held up against them, Kavanaugh, even who wrote a very scathing opinion in that, even pointed out, like, look, I'm not saying he doesn't, like, not saying if the NCAA says basically like no Lamborghinis, the court would probably be okay with that. So this kind of, which is an extreme, but as long as there is some choice, there's some difference. Some of the courts sounded like they would be better with some of these NCAA proposals, or at least the NCAA organization. So it seems like it's a bit of a response to that. It's a response to some of these ongoing litigation and that's going on everywhere. It's not going to settle it, but it's certainly going to prepare, I think, for the future. And there's still a lot of negotiating that's going to be done. This isn't like going to just come out the way it's proposed. There'll probably be changes, but it's an absolutely fascinating moment. We are seeing a ground shake, a groundswell, however you want to say, an earthquake in how college football is going to be run in college sports. And, it's interesting. Every year people will say, oh, people stop watching. This is the most watched season of college football. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it changes and how people react. Ski Masks Murphy, you've been really patient. What's going on, man?
Yeah, I feel like the software jumped me like 2 minutes ahead of time, so I think I missed some things. But yeah, what you're talking about, the I guess the more colloquial term, the whole Division 4 thing. I don't think that's exactly going to work out. I think they will find a way to pay players. I did hear you mention Title IX, and that would be a thing. I think the most successful way for them to work it out to pay athletes and stay within Title IX regulations, just sort of like pull the revenue of every sport together, then somewhat split it equally among all athletes at a university. But like you said, like some of these schools have approaching 1,000 people playing sports, and some are like 200 to 300. So some programs that probably is not going to be sustainable. And I think pushing to that model, especially separating off other schools, is not going to work. I mean, if you pay attention to European soccer and the whole proposed soccer super league, and you saw how easily that got shut down by the fans, I think it'd be a similar thing here. But yeah, I think the fallout from Florida State not making it into the college football playoff is going to shake up the college football world, which eventually shakes up the whole collegiate sports world. Because, I mean, they've said it for decades that, football and basketball are two sports that pay for every other sport. And if you have ground shakes like this happening once every probably 4 to 5 years in college football, it's gonna implode on itself, possibly.
It is, on a lighter note, I remember, gosh, on Sunday, not even Saturday, pardon me, before this all came out, kind of the joke I made, and I don't tweet as much as some of my colleagues, but I was like, if they don't let Florida State in, there's just going to be a quick email reply all to the entire ACC. We're out, bill us, and then Sunday happened, and I'm like, man, given all the tension for those of you who were around, especially during the off season, starting early this year, like roughly, I want to say January, February, during a board of regents, or however they call it, board of trustees at Florida State, they were basically openly talking about leaving the ACC, and they're trying to work it out, see how they can get out of it, because these two new media deals for the Big Ten and the SEC are going to give them all this money, and now Florida State's going to get less money than Vanderbilt. And they were kind of going on and on and on about this. And then, they managed to keep together. They added, obviously Cal and Stanford and SMU were coming in. And then this happens. My goodness, this could not have happened at a worse time, just in terms of keeping that conference happy and necessarily together, because that was arguably one of their biggest strengths. Ski Masks Murphy, and then I'm going to let up Gregory.
Yeah, to go on this whole FSU thing, I mean, yeah, there was the whole them thinking about leaving, but the ACC has they've raised their fees after the Big Ten basically paid for Maryland to get up the ACC. That they try to ensure it doesn't happen again. I mean, the ACC does have a good crop of teams in all sports that makes them pretty sustainable, but this whole FSU being left out, football sort of I don't know what's going to happen on FSU's back end, but also it sort of did seem like from reading some of the material coming out, especially Heather Dinich, who's basically
Yeah.
it feels like she's the only reporter allowed inside the meetings, so she has a fairly good grasp of what they're thinking. And I mean, on Saturday night when everyone basically was debating what's going on, she comes on ESPN and says, "Yeah, it seems like Florida State may end up being number 6." And then her article, I think it was yesterday that she came out with, basically sort of seems like with inside the room, no one really expected Florida State to win. Who was on the committee? They all sort of wrote them off already, and it sort of seems like the I wouldn't call it the fix is already in, but it sort of seems like you're already depending on already having an SEC champion, and whether it was Georgia, Alabama, and that Florida State was sort of an afterthought. And I think a lot of people at Florida State are going to read into that as in, well, even even with their quarterback, looking back some few things in the media, it sort of seems like the ACC was already written off, and Florida State and Clemson may start making their plans to leave. Like you said, I mean, seeing the letters from everyone at Florida State, sort of seems like this could be the shot that breaks the camel's back. I don't see them getting into the Big Ten or the SEC immediately because a 17-team conference seems a little weird. But I mean, if Clemson goes with them, then they'll immediately get accepted anywhere they want.
Yeah, and the Knolls do have, I mean, I think the Knolls are blue blood enough that some people would be willing to make that exception. It's like Notre Dame. Any conference would be like, yeah, sure, we'll take you. We don't even care about who you're matched with. Just join. They're not, I mean, Florida State isn't quite to that level of national stuff, but they've got enough. And I just want to emphasize, I think next year, the ACC will be in no matter what. And, another thing, and I was having this conversation actually, because CBS sports writer Shehan Jayaraj and I, we do another a show for a podcast called the CFP Survivor Show, and he asked me, if Florida State beats Georgia, should they claim a championship? And I thought, yeah, why not? I mean, I thought it was a great question. I mean, if they can beat Georgia, and again, even if Georgia has some attrition and people sitting out, it's still Georgia. The talent is phenomenal. I mean, matched by only Alabama and maybe, gosh, I'm not even sure what schools are at that level or try to be at that level, right? Maybe Texas A&M. But if they can do that, maybe we'll see that. Maybe we'll see a more profound version of what we saw with UCF back in 2018, except it's an ACC team. It'll be like 2003 for those of you who were around for the year the BCS computers completely messed up to the point where they actually changed how they de-emphasized the computers after 2003 because you had an AP number 1 USC somehow not make the BCS championship game. And that was actually the year where we had a playoff without a semifinal without any final because USC number 1 played number 4 Michigan in the Rose Bowl, as it turns out. And the Sugar Bowl, just like this year, hosted what would have been another semifinal between the number 2 and number 3 team. I actually didn't even think about that. That's exactly the layout: number 1 versus number 4 in the Rose, and number 2 versus number 3. At least in the AP, and then the BCS crowned LSU, and the AP kept USC. This reminds me of almost that era, except somehow we had 4 teams and we still managed to not let them in. So it's an interesting thing, and to be fair, I kind of get what the committee was going. I even it's so interesting because, the other side of this, and when we did the show on a Saturday night, we had a lot of conversation from Liberty and SMU fans who wanted to really talk about that when they were still in that race to see who was going to get the G5. And what they said in the call, as well as in the conversations, Boo Corrigan, about why they didn't take FSU, about the team not being the same, all that stuff, as a team that was before. If they were really being true and keeping that, then I understood why they kept Liberty, because even though Liberty's schedule wasn't as strong, they won out and they haven't had any real injuries. Caden Salter's still their quarterback. They still got a decent amount of, the talent that was putting up the crazy scores. So maybe I could reconcile that, but a lot of it doesn't make sense. And I'm letting you up, Gregory, as you're letting up here, because again, if they were talking about the teams that were the best and they were talking about, who would win if you stacked them up against each other, it almost feels like they just did enough to push FSU out. Because then I was surprised, and you're still keeping them ahead of Georgia? Really? I mean, again, the consistency of that thinking I didn't quite entirely understand. Greg, what's up?
I have one question. In your honest opinion, I know Rutgers miraculously made a bowl game. So, do you think they have any chance against Miami, since Miami was ranked this year? And I just want your honest opinion.
Miami's been completely unpredictable this year. I mean, actually, I know Tyler Van Dyke entered the portal. Is he going to play that game? And frankly, if he does, I don't even know. Like he was so hot and cold that I'm not even sure what kind of player, because that's the pinstripe bowl. Yeah, I just remembered that because Miami's got to come up and play, and who knows, maybe that's going to also play a factor in it. Rutgers knows cold. Rutgers knows that area. Can you imagine Miami coming up there? I'm not even sure. Like, do you think it's gonna be a really kind of Rutgers audience? Because I mean, I don't know how many Miami fans are looking to go to New York at that time of year.
It's Thursday at like 2:15, so I think most people
Oh
work
my
during
God.
that day. Yeah, it's so weird. Yeah, it's so very weird.
Yeah, no, I think for the reasons of just Miami is still kind of they couldn't find consistency. That's part of the reason why Van Dyke's leaving, or at least looking to leave in the portal. We'll see if the portal he threw his name in the portal. We'll see if the portal throws it back. I mean, but I don't know. That's a great question. Rutgers definitely kind of felt like they petered out a little bit towards the end, because I mean, it almost felt like they got cursed by the committee in a weird way, because at one point when they were talking about why they were keeping Ohio State still ahead of Georgia, like Boo Corrigan started going off on how great Rutgers defense was, and I'm like, wow, really? Have we not paid enough? I'm like, man, I knew Rutgers wasn't doing terrible, but I didn't know if I paid that much attention to how the Scarlet Knights defense was. And then obviously the rest of the games they kept losing after that. They went on a 4-game losing streak from that Ohio State game. So I'm not sure. It's going to be interesting to see how they turn around. The nice thing about these middle kind of bowls, they're so hard to predict because of things like the portal now coming into play, because of opt-outs for some of the folks who think they're going to go into the draft. They've become, in a way, they're going back to almost like the roots of what bowls were about, which was just sort of a bit of a reward, a bit of like tourism, like, hey, come see our part of the country. Although it was originally for warm weather places like Pasadena and New Orleans and Miami. Yankee Stadium in the Bronx, not usually trying to pull people over. Yeah, but I'm it's a fun game to watch only because I get a kick out of seeing how they set up Yankee Stadium, and the idea of people just putting their cleats into it makes me happy.
Yeah, I was there in 2011. It actually was pretty good, but I don't want to go back there because it's kind of like, I already been to that bowl. Maybe one day if they ever wake up fully, they can make a Florida bowl or whatever. But I give Rutgers no chance. Wimsatt can't throw the ball. All they have is Monon guy. And the defense can only last as long as they want to. I think Miami wins the game. I'm just saying as a truthful fan.
Could be, but hey, Rutgers made a bowl. That's a huge deal, especially.
Yeah,
I mean, because it's building it up, and I'm not saying that insultingly. I mean,
I know.
I remember Schiano's first tenure there. And it, chopping wood, just building the team up, building it up year after year.
Yeah, I get it, but how many times does my alma mater have to go nostalgic? Imagine when he retires, they won't go back to him anymore. Who knows what they're going to do? Anyway, I'm glad you guys are talking college football. I like hearing what you guys have to say. Have a great night.
Yeah, you too, man. Thank you. Dean, you've been patient. What's going on?
Yeah, good evening, fellas and ladies. I want to talk about polls, something that you brought up. Which is actually something that I was thinking about this week, because whoever wins the playoff will be declared number one in the coaches poll. But the AP poll, if I understand correctly, they're going to vote their own number one team. And I've read an article or two that a lot of the writers may actually put Florida State in number one if they beat Georgia. So I am wondering that could this be a year, because I'm a little bit older than a lot of the gentlemen here, and I remember where they had the UPI, AP poll, different polls, and I think this year could be a year where the AP poll, grab some people to follow that poll if Florida State beats
Mm-hmm.
Georgia. A second thing, real quick, I want to touch on is NIL. And I think, the 12-team playoff is going to be great. But I think next 5, 10 years, 20 years, NIL and the transfer portal is going to blow up college football totally. And I think you could see, let's say if the guy that owns Nike, he wants to throw 50
Yeah,
million,
Phil Knight.
let's say he wants to do an NIL deal for 5-10 million a year or whatever. I think the ceiling, there is no ceiling in a few years, and I think you're going to have these superstar players going to different universities. I think it could change everything, but that's pretty much it. Thank you.
And I love these points you brought up. I just want to hit the NIL thing first because Phil Knight. I mean, anyone who knows Oregon, that entire program is Phil Knight's baby in so many ways, and he really loves that school for so many reasons. I mean, Nike started because he was designing running shoes for their track coach, right? But I always wondered what T. Boone Pickens, had he still been around, had he still been alive, what he would have been like in this era. Like this, he would have been an absolute fascinating part of all of this, just because his willingness to also throw money at Oklahoma State. Now, I wonder now, because again, with Phil Knight, he tends to, I think, from what I can tell, donate in kind of an old school way. Like he still believes, and old school is not that long ago. I'm literally talking like 5 years ago, right? He likes to donate to facilities and the traditional things that big money donors would donate to. I wonder if we're going to get more, I don't know, lack of a better word, new money. I don't know, tech billionaires, if they're into football, that might be a stretch, but who will come in and be like, yeah, no, I want to throw money at NIL stuff because I want to bring in those players. And it is fascinating because I know Cam Ward, the Wazoo quarterback who had a phenomenal career at Incarnate Word, and then they brought him up to Wazoo, where he had a decent couple of years. He's looking at the draft, but he's also a graduate transfer, so he could transfer again. So I've heard that he's, and again, from decent enough sources all over the internet, that he's had like 10 different $1 million plus, NIL offers his way. And some have argued that he may be the one quarterback who could, I mean, there's a couple out there who might be at that level, but who are in the portal. He's one of the ones that might be able to earn that kind of interest. Now, goodness, oh my gosh, what was your, I'm so sorry, Dean. The first thing you brought up was also extremely fascinating. What was it? I apologize. It slipped my mind, and I blame it being a late Tuesday.
It was the first point was an AP poll, a different poll.
Oh gosh, yes, no, I wanted to hit on this. I have seen those reports. Yes, so the AP poll, and that makes sense because I got the historic AP poll in front of me, right? The AP poll, there have been some of the writers who have said they will vote Florida State #1 if they beat Georgia, which is a pretty big if. So I mean, if they do it, it's certainly not a pansy. No one's going to argue that to beat a one-loss, 2-time reigning champion. And I don't blame them for doing that. And it's fascinating, too, because, I reference, I mean, because you're right, AP UPI poll, UPI poll kind of evolved into what we now know as a coach's poll. It was replaced, or however you want to phrase it. 2003, which I brought up, that split championship year, people don't realize, like, the votes weren't all, like, unanimous. Like, in the AP poll, I just pulled that up, USC had 48 of the first place votes, which put it as #1. And LSU, which had won the Sugar Bowl, had 17 first place votes. There was a little bit of separation. The previous week, it was actually closer. Like LSU had 21 and it went down at 27. And then, and the coaches poll was actually more striking because the way the BCS worked in crowning a champion was the coaches were required to vote for whoever won the BCS, designated the BCS championship bowl. Yet there were 3 coaches that dissented. So there was 60 first place votes for LSU and 3 for USC. And from what I understand, those 3 weren't invited back because they didn't follow the directions that they were told to do. So this year, if FSU wins out, I think we'll see something like that. I think the majority in each poll will probably go with the winner of the playoff because those are 4 exceptional teams. Say what you will about not including FSU, but the 4 teams are going to be exciting. The semifinals, each of them exciting in their own way, and who could win out. I mean, any of those 4 could win out. There's no real world beater right now, which makes it even more intriguing. I think the majority will go with that. But, certainly FSU will probably start to grab a few of those, and maybe some less well-known indicators out there. We'll also want to go out and stretch and give that. Ski Masks Murphy, I see your hand up, and then I'm going to go to someone new. I see several people, and I'm going to try and get to all of you.
Yeah, about the comment about the polls and stuff, and that some voters say they're going to vote for FSU. I mean, there's a lot of ways they can still quote unquote claim a national title because you still have like that. There's a laundry list of former BCS computer polls that could work out to make them a championship. But then there's also like I forgot how many it is, but it's a long list of like in polls listed by the NCAA that can claim a national title, like the Harris Interactive Football Writers Association of America. So if they beat Georgia, this thing could go tons of different ways that they could claim a title, which would be fun, like UCF did.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. It could totally turn. It'll be fun to see the various people that try and legitimate old selectors that get dusted off for this. Andrew, what's going on?
It's interesting because we talk about how people can just buy trophies, man. You can just go to a store and be like, I'm a champion. So, print them up, dude. Why not? Let's just do it. Let's go nuts. UCF did that. They had like a parade in Orlando and everything, and they claim a national title. And who cares? This doesn't mean anything. None of this means anything anyway. Not to go full nihilist on you guys, but
Yeah. Well, no, I mean it's sports. In the end, it is just like there's way more serious stuff going on.
Yeah, it's just all silliness, and I'm all about the chaos. So sure, yeah, FSU national champs, done deal. But anyway, keeping it in Tallahassee for a second, there's people that are saying, oh, they've been trying to leave the conference. The ACC's grant of rights is this ironclad thing that is so ironclad and preposterous through like 2036 that they're seeking like venture capital. They're seeking like they're trying. Yeah.
They're trying to find like venture capital partners to help them out. I mean, it's striking. It is absolutely. There's so much, and again, this is for folks who may not have known this. This is before any of this happened. Like this is stuff that was being discussed in the off season. So, it is fat. And one of the more interesting arguments about why they added both Cal and Stanford and SMU. There was apparently some language in the TV because he's apparently the ACC truly had some of the best attorneys writing those contracts I've ever heard. Because in addition to this grant of rights, it's supposedly unbreakable without paying, over $100 million, like $120 million plus. The TV deal does not allow the network to renegotiate as long as the ACC keeps X number of teams. So by letting in 3 new teams, they kind of said, well, if suddenly Florida State and Clemson and maybe, one other team go really angry and just sort of buy their way out of it, we'll still have the minimum amount of teams. So you can't actually renegotiate the TV contract until it expires. So, they may not have the same cachet having, I don't know, that great Cal at Louisville game, or not to say it. Louisville's actually been great. I still think it's going to be funny to have like Stanford playing a couple of teams that they probably used to academically hold their noses up at. But of course, the ACC's got exceptional academic teams. I'm not trying to diss any of them. But it's fascinating. That was part of the strategy. They let those teams in just in case they lose teams. That keeps their TV money that they're getting, even though it's less than what FSU would want, at the level it was already at.
And speaking a little earlier to, the idea of the Super League thing, I say let's call their bluff, man. Let it, if the SEC and the Big Ten, if they want to be the feeder league directly into the NFL draft, whatever, I say, let them do it. And then why don't we just have like the other ones who care about the tradition or whatever? Because there's not going to be people are just going to stop caring about football that care about these other schools. They're not going to stop supporting their teams. They're not going to stop going to games. They're not going to stop wanting it. Like, let them do it, and we'll see who's who gets more eyeballs, I guess. Who really does, or who really has like the support and the backing. Because I think it's just like it's kind of a silly thing, really, if you think about it. I don't know. I'm not like him and Han over here and thinking that the world's going to end if that happens. I think it would be a shame, but at the same time, like if those teams want to go and do their own thing, kick rocks, man, get out of here. let them have fun, beat each other up and make your tons of money, and because there's still going to be, plenty of other schools that want to field teams and that they'll have something to play for, and they'll have people that cheer them on, and I say go for it. I don't know.
Absolutely. So I saw your hand up, John, and then I've lit up Clutch is Everything.
Hey, can you hear me, Bob?
Sure can.
Hey, so just mentioning FSU. Are we sure they're actually going to show up to the game? I mean, I've
Yeah,
I've
they
heard
are.
the rumors. I mean, I know. I only say because it's the rumors where people are saying online, they should sit out and protest or yada yada yada. I'm really
They
just
would
questioning how.
burn all goodwill that they could have possibly earned if they did that. And I don't think, first of all,
They can't do that.
yeah, not only that, but those guys, they want to go compete. They still want to compete. It's not like, and I granted, you have two teams that are kind of disappointed. Georgia having just lost the SEC title game and lost their opportunity to go for three-peat. And FSU obviously being let out. But man, those two teams, they're going to be motivated to at least show themselves. And the reason they're so successful is because of that motivation and because of that coaching staff and what's built them to who they are. But yeah, but meanwhile, though, I mean, I don't blame some of the people saying, like Caleb Williams just said, he opted out from the Holiday Bowl. I don't think anyone's knocking him for that. So, well, there will be a few opt-outs here and there, especially for the bowls that aren't necessarily going for the playoff. But in the end, the games are still pretty good. If anything, it creates some more chaos. I mean, Louisville's probably gonna. By the way, I haven't had a chance to really sit through it, but the weird kind of ripple effect of FSU not getting in was apparently all the ACC bowls were ready for FSU to get in, so they were all ready to pick their teams. And then when FSU got pushed out, suddenly they all apparently. That's why it took forever to get the final bowl pairings, and somehow Notre Dame got the Sun Bowl. I still can't believe Notre Dame's in El Paso because I keep joking that historically that was where USC would go when they had a really terrible season that was disappointing, and the coach would take the photo with the sombrero of shame on his head. And I totally thought Lane Kiffin famously did in 2012, where the Trojans started the season preseason #1 and finished the regular season 7-5. Just like this year, I was expecting to see Lincoln Riley in the sombrero of shame. I don't think Marcus Freeman has quite earned that, but man, that was a total surprise to me. But let's hear. Clutch is everything. You've been patient. What's on your mind?
Hi, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Awesome. Okay, so two things. One of them is this just college football just not being able to get out of their own way, which is like as tradition as old as the sport itself, right? Like everyone acts like this controversy is like the newest thing ever. This has been going on forever. It's part of the sport. It's the sport can just never be normal, right? But that's why we love it. But I want to say the main sorry, I lost my train of thought. Why is ESPN and Fox not just stepping up and just taking control of the sport at this point? Because nobody seems to be able to just govern themselves, right? Every conference is trying to slowly change and we're going to pay the players, we're going to create these subdivisions slowly, and like I said, we're creeping to this super league thing, but nobody's in charge. And I think with obviously the two big TV control in the sport are ESPN and Fox. I mean, I think if they just came together and just were like, all right, let's do it. It sucks, obviously, but this is where we're going, right? The big 30 to 40 teams, and just do it, right? Because this whole slow march to the death is just it's making for so much heartache for so many fans, right? With all this rivalries that are going to die for a few years and eventually come back. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was, oh man, I truly lost my train of thought on that one. But
Don't worry about it.
yeah,
Why don't you hang here? I
yeah,
won't let you. If you want, we just raise
sure.
your hand, and we can get to your next
Thank
point. You know, it's interesting. The lack of leadership in college sports has definitely been something that's been a long-standing issue, and you're absolutely right about that. Charlie Baker, to his credit, you know, with this proposal that we just got from the NCAA today about creating this new sort of division for the top teams, again as a response to litigation that they're now facing and assuming they're probably going to lose, and they want to kind of get ahead of it. Now the TV networks, and this is where, okay, it was so funny when you started talking about the TV networks. I'm like, oh, are we going to get the conspiratorial view that ESPN is directing all of this? I think that's putting the cart before the horse. It's a chicken and egg thing kind of stuff. You know, I think, frankly, the TV networks are just responding to what pays out. And they tell the conferences, yeah, if you let in some teams with bigger markets, and actually, it's interesting. There's been a shift to that. And I should be really clear. And this last series of moves after USC and UCLA left, because I mean, we could still make some sense, geographic sense, of Texas and Oklahoma moving into the SEC and bringing obviously two huge brands. But the whole USC UCLA thing, some of the interviews that were done and in the background were absolutely exceptional, especially talking to like guys who were like the past head of Fox Sports programming and you know, people who were the decision makers. And they said the shift has actually become not footprint, not even TV market in the local area. It's actually brand names, because people will tune in to watch USC and Ohio State play each other. People will tune in to watch Texas play Florida if they're both ranked. Like those are it was actually starting to become brand name more than anything. And so I think they were getting some of that feedback from like, yeah, if you want to get a bigger TV payout, because you're, you know, as a commissioner, as a conference, your job is to try and please the presidents of all these universities and their athletic directors. I think that was kind of part of it, but I don't know if they were necessarily like directing it. But in terms of taking over, like you're suggesting, I don't think they don't want that noise. They don't want that smoke. They'd rather the NCAA and these conferences take all the heat and then have to deal with because I mean, universities are awful to deal with in some ways. I mean, I love universities, but they're a macro version of one of my favorite quotes, which I'm going to mangle because I don't have it in front of me, but there is no more intense situation than a faculty meeting, because never has so much emotion been over things where the stakes are so low. It's just like if you get enough academics together, they go to the mattresses over meaningless things. And you get universities, and they kind of still operate in that same sense, even though they're with all this money at stake, it's hard for them to say no.
Yeah, and
did you remember the second thing you wanted to bring up?
Yes, I did. Sorry, the second thing, and yeah, what I was gonna say is because you mentioned ESPN and the conspiracy. I don't see how that would make sense, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but do the people in the committee get paid for what they're doing?
If they do, it's not much. I mean, you don't do it for the money. You do it for the
time.
You know, these are all academic. These are all already academic administrators. Boo Corrigan's actually with NC State, which is really awkward, because when he was answering questions about why the ACC wasn't let in, he basically, that's his conference. He basically had to say like, my conference isn't good enough to produce a champion that we were going to pick as the 4 best teams. So it's I believe one of the members is a member of the media, and I forgot exactly how they divide that. Like the next head of the because the only head of the CFP in its creation has been, Bill Hancock, who's been in academia forever, athletics, but he's been like almost a professional administrator for long time. His successor is from the Air Force, so we're going to have someone who's got a military background starting soon, and I'm very fascinated to see how that changes, if it changes how the playoff committee's operated.
Yeah, and my last point, because that's what I was going to get to, is I don't think ESPN would have a hand in this, because the CFP committee, I assume they are going to be selling the rights for the expanded version soon, right? And they need competition. So for them, if they were just straight up honest about it, for them, letting in Alabama so that they can have a higher TV rating, so that they can sell the TV rights for a higher dollar. I mean, that in a way affects ESPN negatively, because all of a sudden now they have to pay a little bit more so that they can keep some of these games from going to Fox or NBC or CBS. So that's where, I mean, I don't know where ESPN would come into this in terms of, oh, this is a conspiracy for ESPN, because they're going to be battling for these upcoming rights like everyone else is, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah.
Yeah, and their bottom line is they just want TV viewers. That's it. I mean, we always forget, like, they don't care about the programming as long as people show up. That's why they remember the World Series of Poker. I remember when that was the biggest thing on ESPN. I was in grad school at that time. So I mean, if it brings eyeballs, they'll push it. They'll push it hard. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey, Ski Mask Murphy, I see your hand up, and then the Water Boy.
Just to be on the opposite side of the conspiracy theory, I do not believe this, but if ESPN wanted to have a hand in it to create more ratings, the only thing I would say that would make the conspiracy worthwhile and that ESPN putting their hands into generate ratings for, advertising revenues, the fact that I still believe, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I still believe in ESPN's contract with college football playoff, they have the first right of refusal for any competitor's offer to buy it out. So basically, they always have the opportunity to up the value on someone else without, someone just spitting out a high number and not being spoken to. So they could sort of stack the deck for themselves if the conspiracy was real, which I don't believe.
Yeah. Waterboy, what's going on?
I want to speak a little bit about SMU. Basically, the committee told us by letting Alabama in, it was because of the grind or the difficult nature of the SEC schedule. For that G5 spot, it was basically between SMU and Liberty. And it was like they went, oh, Liberty won all their games. They get in. And they didn't bother to look at the fact of like who SMU played and that their losses were to Oklahoma and TCU early in the season. I'm not even sure who Liberty played. They had like the easiest ranked schedule. So it was just very frustrating to me as like a G5 fan to see SMU left out under the exact same conditions that Alabama got in.
And there's some fascinating things with that whole pick because and really early on, again, these shows kind of stretch on. I could, oddly enough, reconcile some of the choices they made with Liberty in their schedule, even though they had, again, a week's. The best thing about their schedule, to the shock, I think, of anyone in the preseason, was New Mexico State being a 10-win team. I don't think anyone foresaw New Mexico State rising to the level they did. But one thing they did have going for them that didn't work out for Florida State, and it certainly seems to be something that the committee locked into, was they had no major injuries. Caden Salter is still their quarterback. They top to bottom, they still have most of their impact players that were dominating their opponents. And again, dominating opponents, that's part of the reason why Michigan, I think, went up to number one rather than necessarily Washington in the stead of Georgia, because even though Washington arguably has a better resume, Michigan had been dominating more consistently. You can make those, again, if you're assuming those are the things they're doing. And as I've said, they're not always consistent. But meanwhile, somebody flat out in the phone kind of interview after the show asked Boo Corrigan if SMU was penalized for the fact that their own star quarterback, Preston Stone, is out for the season because he was injured. And he claimed it wasn't a factor in it, which brings some doubt. I actually wonder if they just sidestepped the conversation by saying, well, Liberty did win out and they have all their key players. Because I remember late in I actually have the sentence he said, Liberty's averaging over 500 yards a game, scored over 40 points. Looking at it any differently than going against their schedule. And again, we do strength of schedule and bands. And the band between SMU and Liberty was not so great that we looked at it as a key reason to change the vote.
If SMU played Liberty's schedule, they would have averaged, if they just kept the gas on the whole way, they would have averaged 900 yards a game if they never stepped off the gas pedal.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because, I mean, they played they played P5 teams, and Liberty arguably couldn't schedule them. I think Liberty wanted them. They just can't. Liberty's got some baggage kind of going along with them. But it's interesting, too, because, ranked Oklahoma team, they kept close with them, and then Oklahoma kind of, it was a closer game than the final score indicates there. And then they lost a rivalry game. They lost to TCU, which was, rivalry games create all kinds of wacky situations. Auburn, but for the 4th and 31 nearly took out Alabama just a couple of weeks ago. So it's interesting. And Either way, I think I would have been able to make sense out of it. I'm a little surprised. I was expecting them to pull, SMU out from unranked to being one rank ahead of them for beating Tulane, but apparently it wasn't good enough, and that was definitely a striking result. John, I see your hand up, and then I'm going to let up Gamecock Superman.
So yeah, my quick question regarding that. So, do you think that affects scheduling in the future for these G5 teams? Do you think some G5 programs look and they think, oh well, if I we schedule an easy, if we have an easy schedule, that might get the committee to put us into the last spot from the Year Six Bowl versus playing a more difficult or more challenging schedule.
It might do that, but I mean, it's interesting just to recall that Liberty was not the first team that they were expecting to, because remember, before the season, we all thought Air Force was going to just run away with it, and then Army happened, and then Air Force just didn't look the same after that. We had obviously Fresno State. Fresno State's interesting because they were also looking strong. They had dropped a close game early on. And then now hearing Jeff Tedford retired for medical reasons, I'm now wondering if that was related to whatever was going on, that Fresno State just suddenly seemed to kind of run out of gas halfway through the season. I'm not sure if they were related. I'm sure, we'll get more and more as offseason comes on and we kind of hear more of a feedback on some of these teams. But yeah, it was overall, though. I remember within like 3 weeks, just talking with people, like, this is a weak year for the G5. And oddly enough, Toledo also had a great run, but it would have fallen to Miami in the final week because Miami ended up pulling it all out. And Miami is one of those better G5 teams that simply hasn't been talked about a whole lot. So I think really Liberty benefited from the fact also that this was just a weirdly weak year for the G5. You just didn't have a whole lot of these candidates sweeping through. I still remember the year Western Michigan. I remember the NIU year. I remember the Boise years. I remember TCU when they were a G5 program, Utah when they were a G5 program. We didn't have like some crazy team just like marching through the schedule. And I think that to an extent benefited Liberty just being the last one standing. So in terms of scheduling, had they not been in a year where all the other G5s were just kind of falling all over the place, it wouldn't have helped them. But it came down, think about it, it came down to Tulane finally losing in that final week. Otherwise, Tulane would have had it. Absolutely. All Tulane had to do was beat SMU. And Liberty, by the nature of being the last team standing, took it. Gamecock Superman, what's going on, man?
How's it going tonight?
I'm good. How are you? It's been tough.
Yeah. No postseason obviously for South Carolina, but that's sometimes how it goes. But obviously we're talking about the playoffs and everything going on around this time in college football, and I've noticed that there are roughly 3,000 players in the transfer portal right now. Oh,
I know you're joking, but it's over 1,000, and I know Juice Wells is one of them.
yeah. My question to you about the transfer portal is there anything the NCAA can do to kind of restrict it? Because we've seen guys like DJ Uyunglele transfer literally 3 times in 3 seasons. Last season he transferred from Clemson, and then 1 year later he's in the portal again. We've seen other quarterbacks do similar things. I'm wondering how these players get this many, free transfers, and what can we sort of do to stop it? Because the more free and easy it is for players to kind of transfer out. Not saying I want to, restrict their ability if they're not getting playing time, or, they want to move up from the FCS to the FBS level, or they want to move from a G5 to a Power 5 team. They should be able to do that. But, we've also seen a lot of issues where you have guys on Power 5 rosters essentially being paid to go to different schools, and essentially being poached. Is there anything the NCAA can do to sort of restrict the transfer portal as it relates to the whole NIL aspect of this?
It's a lot of this is difficult only because so much of the litigation that has kind of loosened up these rules show that courts are in favor of giving players choices and more share of the pie, bigger share of the pie. The whole reason Charlie Baker at the NCAA proposed this really radical for the NCAA anyway proposal to create a new division. Is to sort of to come up with a way of revenue sharing without necessarily making players employees, because that's what they're trying to do. And of course, to be fair, the portal can benefit in some directions. I mean, Spencer Rattler being at South Carolina being one of those bits of it. But part of what's going on now, and they have tried to restrict it a little bit. Now the portal window is smaller, which I know is really frustrating for these coaches, because it's actually, I think the coaches were in favor of it because the portal has made everything chaotic for them. Now you've got teams preparing for the bowl season, preparing in some cases for the playoff, but also looking at, half of these quarterbacks are leaving. Who does? How happy are Oregon? I mean, Oregon's in Washington. How happy are they with the backups? Should they look for a new quarterback, even though they're getting ready for the playoff? There's so many of this going on, even at the top levels of the sport, that it's tough to it's made it tough for everyone. Now, grad transfers have been a thing for a long time. I mean, they were the first real change that started to make it feel a little bit closer to free agency. And for some of these players, that's what's happening. That's why they're transferring again so quickly. They've managed to finish their undergraduate degree, because you get one free transfer portal move in your undergraduate, and then graduate transfers are still a thing. I've heard some funny conversations. I think it was Dan Wetzel. He was joking like, can they just keep getting graduate degree after graduate degree? And it would be funny if they're getting all this money now to be perpetual college football players. I mean, a substantial sum of money. I'm not talking like, not all of them are getting like $1 million a year or something like that, but more than they would have ever hoped to get in the NFL had they ever made the NFL. Well, we get some of them trying to argue like, no, I want to be a professional college football player, and I'll just keep stacking up all of these graduate degrees. Rather than, being $500,000 in debt, they'll actually come out with a net positive.
Well, yeah, I mean, the professionalization aspect of it. I
Right.
don't know how true this is, but I read somewhere that apparently Marvin Harrison Jr. is considering his options, as far as staying in college, because teams are, essentially offering him so much money that it might be more valuable for him to stay in college than it would be for him to become a top five, overall NFL pick, which seems
I would.
ridiculous to me.
That sounds patently ridiculous. That's a sum of money we're talking about that no college has ever tried to match. I couldn't imagine that. That would be wild. Ski Mask Smurfy, I see your hand up, and then in the queue I see the book. I'm going to try to get to you as well. I actually keep seeing a hand flying up, and I think that was Coach Clark. I'll try and let you up if you're trying to get up here as well. But Ski Mask Smurfy, what's going on?
Yeah, I've heard the same thing, but with a lot of prospects as well, with skipping NFL for to stay in college with the money that they're paying out. But a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. as a Michigan fan, who I've just seen in my nightmares every day, but it didn't turn out that day for the game. Him being like a top 10 pick, no college can match that amount of money. But for someone who's like a DJ Unyele, I'm sorry if I slaughtered his name, but him probably tracking to be like a 4th or 5th round pick, he's better off staying in college, because the amount of money school would pay for him to like have a chance at a title would be way better than the NFL.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This has been a boon for some of these players who definitely would in previous years would have, I wouldn't say necessarily unscrupulous, but agents who would encourage them to enter the draft early with promises of picks that just never materialized. Certainly, although I've heard now we're hearing about, again, unscrupulous agents telling players, no, enter the portal. We'll totally get you, some incredible deal to transfer to another program that also may not materialize. So, what an interesting situation. Let's see the book.
The bookshelf.
Oh, I get it. Oh,
Shelf.
that's awesome. I love it. Yes.
Thank you.
What's on your mind, man?
I was wondering if we could talk about a level of football with a legitimate playoff for just a quick second.
NAIA, baby. Oh, wait. Oh, no. So we're talking.
Yeah. NAIA is fun too. But no, I was just kind of thinking like this last weekend, man. I mean, I went to the North Dakota State at Montana State game. Where I don't know if you all were at home watching the conference championships, I don't blame you, but you guys missed a heck of a banger. And just, I mean, you had this 35-34 shootout that ends with a blocked PAT in overtime, and NDSU goes ahead and goes on to the quarterfinals again. And that was a ton of fun. I'm also super pumped as a Montana fan anyways, because like, are we capital B back? That's a different feeling that I've never had, where I'm like, I didn't grow up around the Montana teams of 2000s, and so it's like, oh cool, this is what being a fan of a contender's like. But more seriously though, I'm kind of like, Delaware played its last FCS playoff game ever on Saturday, and I feel like nationally the FCS is just about to collapse, because I feel like that move, just like Delaware is such an iconic program for the history and evolution of football, and seeing them decide that they're done with the now Coastal Athletic Association, which barf. Just the CAA mismanaged itself very much in a way like the Pac-12 did, and with the South kind of already having fallen apart in the wake of the Sun Belt's rise, the East Coast is falling apart, and I just kind of feel like at a certain point, are we having like the FCS championship just become a Missouri Valley versus Big Sky bowl game? And the last point, just because this was hit on by other people a lot today, was this transfer portal really needs some regulation, because for the sake of everyone who actually works in the sport, just because like this early signing window is catastrophic, with deadlines showing intent to transfer. I think it's like December 15th or 13th. Our seasons are still ongoing at this point, and we're having players announcing that they're transferring today in the middle of the playoff run. This is just not like trying to manage your roster while you're in the middle of the postseason. I'm not against, player agency and needing to transfer and everything, but at a certain point, we got to be. I feel like this early signing window has been pretty much devastating for everyone, but like a select few transfers. It's just not good for coaches. It's not good for administrators. It's not good for schedulers. That's kind of my piece on that. But yeah, I was more looking to talk about the death of the FCS in the East Coast and just kind of other exciting things too. But that's kind of on my mind.
Those are legitimate beefs, and I'm glad you brought all up. First of all, though, I just want to say the footage that we were getting from Montana, Delaware was incredible, because I was at Montana. It was in a snowstorm. So some of the photos that came out of that were spectacular. And yeah, Montana looks legit. North Dakota State just feels inevitable, because this has been one of their weakest seasons in a long time. And here they are in the quarters against number 3 South Dakota, who I believe beat them. I can't remember if they did. No, yeah, they did. Yeah, I totally remember that.
Went 0-3 against the Dakotas.
Yeah, that was, and South Dakota State looks outright terrifying, because I had a chance to cover one of their games. I was at they played here at Target Field against Drake, and then Drake drew North Dakota State for their first playoff game. It's so funny too, because they lost their first 3 games in non-conference, went undefeated in Pioneer Football League, which for those who don't know, that's an FCS non-scholarship conference, which is a whole story in and of itself. And then what do they get for their first playoff game? They get North Dakota State, who beats them almost as bad, because they lost 70-7 to South Dakota State. They lost 66-3 to North Dakota State. Man, just kind of a reminder that they're out there. But I'm excited to see. The weird thing is, in reverse, Idaho dropping down, that was some people saw it as a catastrophe for the Vandals program. They're also in the quarters after that exciting OT win in the Kibbe Dome against SIU, the Salukis. I remember we had a few folks who were watching that and just like, I've heard that game was also an exceptional game. But going back to what you were saying, though, you're right. And the CAA is just so fascinating. Like the Colonial, as you said, the Coastal Athletic now, because they've also hemorrhaged Sunbelt teams. Old Dominion was in there for a while. Georgia State was in there for a while. James Madison is obviously the most prominent recent departure from them. So they've been doing a good job of, unfortunately, maybe too good of a job, of creating prospects that are ideal candidates for some of these conferences looking to expand. Now, Conference USA was kind of in a pinch, so I do get why they went after Delaware. They've been looking for more teams after they got poached in that last round. And surprisingly looked better this season than anyone gave them credit. I mean, they looked really bad before the season. I mean, what was it? It was, again, Liberty. You had New Mexico State, and then you had, a couple of teams who were just moving up, like Jack State and Sam Houston. And Sam Houston, even though they didn't have the greatest season, looked a little more competitive. When you'd actually pay attention to how they were playing, they just didn't have an offense. They had a great defense. Jack State earned their way, where they were able to get, like James Madison, a bowl bid by nature of not being enough teams. They had enough wins, but they needed another team, and they got Delaware. Now the question is who the next team is going to be. I've heard they're thinking about UMass. I've heard that UMass has been in kind of a desperate strait, who, by the way, UMass was also in the CAA back in the day. Then they joined the MAC, and then they had a really bad idea about going independent, which hurt football pretty badly for them. So I don't know. I'm wondering if it's a good question, because FCS, particularly in the South, seems to be getting kind of eaten alive a little bit with the teams in Texas that have moved up with some of these other programs in the South. I know every now and again you ask, we've had the famous 1-year fiasco that FAMU had, moving up and then moving back down kind of quietly and hoping no one noticed that they did it. No, it's interesting. If we see and now you make me want to put this in the bigger context, because no one's really sat down and sorted out this NCAA proposal to take the very top of the NCAA, of the FBS programs that can afford it to kind of create this sort of compensation model. There's going to be left behinds. I mean, MAC, most of the Sun Belt, and probably the entire Sun Belt. I mean, there's going to be like P5 teams that cannot maintain what's going to be asked of them to go up to that level. And for those teams, I mean, what happens? Is there going to be kind of a great merger of the left behinds in FCS? Do we actually, because would that make more sense? Do we kind of create sort of a combined FCS, what's left of FBS? Although it would be really interesting to see how that would sort out. There's problems with that, because obviously the Ivy League and the Pioneer Football League wouldn't be a good pairing with some of the teams that are going to be there. I don't know what you would do with, imagine, a major team having to go play a game at Duquesne, in that stadium that's like 2,500 people right off the freeway in Pittsburgh.
And Duquesne might not be one of those teams that gets there. I mean, there could be a third level in there too. It's fascinating.
That's going to be the great mystery, is what happens to FCS versus the people who were not going up to the people that did not ascend to whatever you want to call this new division that they're trying to sort out. Man, what a great question. Yeah. Thank you so much for contributing to that, though. Those are mysteries. Those are ones I'm not sure we're going to have an answer to ready anytime soon.
Not for some time, and all that we can do is just enjoy some good football.
Absolutely. Hey, Tom, what's
going on?
How
you doing? Nice to chat with you. And as a graduate of both the University of Minnesota and USC, I wanted to focus on the school that's been a historical football powerhouse and has been in the news lately for their underwhelming season and what's going on with the bowl season. That's Minnesota, of course. And first of all, I think it's great to commemorate the fact that we're the last school to win 3 national championships in a row. Granted that.
Thank you, Alabama.
Yes.
Thank you, Alabama.
Thank you, Alabama, for that. And who cares if it happened when my grandpa was 20 years old? It happened. I feel like we should be like the 72 Dolphins and Mercury Morris, where we pop open the champagne bottles every year and like, hey, it's still us. We're number one. But in true Minnesota fashion, we're constantly reminded of past greatness, or we've done things that are great and yet let down at the end of the day. And that's our whole bowl situation, where we get in because of academics. It's great. That's what college is all about. But it's like, yeah, you're 5 wins. Not a great thing there. And then you're going to send us to Detroit. Okay. That's not great either. And then you get the reminder that we're playing Bowling Green. And the last time we played them here in Minnesota in 2021, we were 30.5-point favorites, and they came in and beat us 14-10. So
that's such a gopher moment. That is
totally.
Like, for those who don't know, Tom and I are both graduates of these 2 schools. We know each other fairly well. And that if you know Minnesota sports, this somehow fits. That's the sad thing. Yep. It just fits.
Yes, it does. And I feel like, and I'm sorry for any Nebraska fans out there, but I feel like that's what Nebraska is going to be doing someday. They're going to remember the good old days of the 80s, the 90s, the wishbone, and you're going to turn into Minnesota, I feel like, too. And it's not a good feeling.
Looking at those halcyon days of the 1930s, the Great Depression wasn't that depressing for us, baby. It was those were good years.
I just can't wait for the historic matchup of Minnesota versus UCLA at the Rose Bowl.
And I can't remember, is UCLA actually hosting Minnesota this year? I know USC's heading to Michigan next year, and that's going to be a heck of a matchup.
The Big Ten matchup everybody wants to see, UCLA and Minnesota.
Yep. and all the Minnesota fans are excited because we get to play in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, that's going to be the closest it gets.
Exactly.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, man. Oh, boy. Well, Tom, thank you so much, man. It's great hearing from you. Let's see here. I'm going to also let up Coach Clark. It's been a minute. How are you doing, man? Well, I see it's now doing the spinning. I'm trying to connect you. So as he's being let up, Dr. Pepper Bucko, our friend from Pitt, and I'm going to let you up. Hey, Coach Clark, it looks like it worked. So, Coach Clark, can you unmute? Sure can.
Oh, yeah, got my beats on. Well, I guess it was, if I describe the 2023 season, it's something close to the Twilight Zone or the Mirror Universe in Star Trek, something like that. It was strange for us at Western Oregon, too. I didn't really want to talk about my guys too much. We didn't quite have the season we thought we were going to have, so we were hitting recruiting hard, and we're back to the drawing board. Or a junior college transfer or a portal pirate, hit my DMs. But I will tell you, I think that the 12-team playoff is going to make everything we've been talking about for the last hour, it is going to chill everything out and make it calm down. It's going to calm down the portal, all the NIL stuff, these wacky TV contracts. It's going to even the playing field and create equity because college football, the recruiting is the lifeblood. We run a 3-4 defense because most of the guys we recruit to play defense are tweeners. They're not quite a traditional linebacker. Or it's really hard to find a 6'5", 260-pound defensive end that's a traditional, with a 7-foot wingspan. That's your traditional edge rusher. But I had more fun this year watching all those Mountain West games on Tubi. And, UNLV with the go-go offense, I have a secret ambition to coach there someday, if anyone on their staff's listening. And that's everything that's happened in college football the last few years is because they took so long to expand the playoffs. Pac-12 going belly under. It took too long to expand. They took way too long expanding the playoffs. The 14 playoff, you'd see kids from California going to Clemson and Bama for the first time ever. They used to never recruit west of the Rockies. And all the the blue chip kids, that's what really hurt the Pac-12 was keeping the blue chip players home. But if you want college football will survive. I'm just an X's and O's guy. I don't understand politics or the TV contracts or nothing like that. But I think the Mountain West is going to be the conference of giant killers next year. For one, they've done a better job ever than the Pac-12 ever did in the last 10, 15 years of retaining coaches. They're keeping Craig Bowl, they're keeping Brent Brennan. The new coach at Boise State, he's got people excited about their program. And we're going to see a lot more equity. You're going to see these greater of five knocking off the big dogs. This thing about Florida State being pissed off about not getting the playoff, they're going to get their opportunity. There's going to be a lot more people are going to be a lot less pissed off at the selection committee and whatnot.
Coach, I agree with you on that. I've said that. I think as hot as things are getting now, first of all, it's the best transition for going to a 12-team playoff next season. People are going to actually be excited. We're not going to have the nonsense. 2014 when it started, because the whole reason, for those who may not know, the whole reason we have the 14 playoff rather than the bigger 6 or 8-team playoff is because Bulls were really cranky about giving up their spots. The Rose Bowl is I used to love the Rose Bowl. I still do. But man, they have been a big factor in why things have been so slow to evolve in college football. In fact, bringing them into the BCS was one of the things that delayed the BCS from even appearing over so many years. And accommodating them was part of the reason why the initial playoff was just a 4-team playoff. Now, heading into the 12-team, things seem to be at least heading somewhat in the same direction. And I think, yeah, there'll be controversy, but there will not be the controversy we see with Florida State in a fight over who should have been number 12. You know what I mean? It's just not going to be the same.
It's like when I was in college, like it was that 2000, the year that Boise State upset Oklahoma. I can't remember. I think it was Florida and Ohio. I can't remember who was in that final, but it was Ohio State, a Jim Tressel team, and Les Miles and LSU went in there and they just kicked the crap out of them. And it seems like, man, maybe there's some other guys that should get a shot at this final. And this NIL stuff in the portal, I'll tell you this, I think they're trying to limit it that you can only be in the portal 45 days or something. And they need to do that not just for, the blue chip guys, but for the players. My first year crunching numbers on the portal, it's one of my recruiting areas. And once our main recruiting season slows down in February, we sign our guys pretty early, we do our homework on them. I go start peeking at the portal, see if there's any kids that want to come home to Oregon, because there's a very small demographic we're looking for in there. It's usually guys that, either went bigger, that's better, and they want to come home. Mostly kids from, anywhere between Washington and Northern California that want to return home, be closer to home for school and whatnot, and they want to play, But I will tell you this, the majority of the guys that were in the portal that aren't on the radar, my first year, it was nickel safeties, which is a fancy term for, our spare DB that really should be playing linebacker, not quite great at covering a deep third. Or slot receivers, guys that are a dime a dozen in the modern game. So if you're these guys are entering the portal out of speculation, and they find out, man, maybe being on a D1 roster doesn't always mean you're a D1 guy. And so it was like the friend zone or the mafia. You'd never get out.
I just wanted to ask you a quick question, only because I know you've had your eyes obviously in the Lone Star Conference this past season. Permian Basin, obviously UT Permian Basin. Chris McCullough's first season there, not bad. To win, to go 8-0 in conference, go into the playoff, kind of an upset loss to my Minnesota's own Bemidji State. But that was interesting. I know you guys had a decent enough game with them, but I was shocked to already see his name is now slowly coming up for some of the outlier, and it didn't pan out. He actually came up as a UTEP suggestion, and I was like, wow, already? The guy's like 12. I mean, he's not 12. I mean, but he's one of the youngest coaches out there.
He's younger than I am. I'm 35.
Well, I'm older than all of you. But no, he's one of those guys that everyone's going to have to keep an eye on, because, I mean, what he did at East Central, because we got a guy in our team here at our CFB, Inkblot, who's very knowledgeable about D2, and he was talking about what was going on at East Central in Oklahoma, and then he obviously went to a D2 Power at Permian Basin, and yeah, I've been actually impressed by that, and of course, unfortunately, I think they right now. Meanwhile, it just seems like it's Colorado Mines and everybody else. That's one thing where I'm very curious to see how this works out.
So they had a really young team when we played them last, and they kicked the crap out of us. And that crew they had was really young. They had they were all sophomores then, so they're probably real legit. Other than that, I really haven't been watching the playoffs much.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly.
One last thing I wanted to mention, because this is sheer luck. Because again, we have guys we send out to do reporting, men and women. I'm actually very happy with our team. But one of the guys who's been helping us for many years, he was in, he has a job that travels a lot. So his job moved him to Durango a week before the final game of the regular season, which for those who may not know, because I would know D2 this well, it was the number one D2 team, Colorado Mines, which was like 10-0, visiting the worst team in the conference, the winless Fort Lewis Skyhawks. So we actually had a guy in the press box for that, which we're actually wondering, are we going to see what we joked, the Cobra Kai award for the most merciless victory? And it was respectable. But it was a blowout for the ages. Everyone was very amiable there. I just have to say that, because they're playing for the love of it. But man, oh man, I enjoy a good D2 football. I see a couple of hands up. Gamecock Superman and then Ski Mask Smurfy. What's up?
Well, I wanted to sort of comment on the whole playoff expansion situation. And obviously, I do feel that Florida State got screwed over by not being put in. I would have left Bama out and put Florida State in as the 4 if it was my decision, but obviously it wasn't. But my question to you is, do you not feel that the playoff should have expanded maybe from 4 to 6 first rather than going straight from 4 to 12? Because one of the main reasons why, a lot of people like college football so much is because the regular season is a playoff, right? The fact that Bama, you know, made that miraculous play against Auburn means that they, saved their playoff hopes, right? It made that game against, a below average Auburn team have playoff implications. And in the expanded playoff, a 2-loss Bama would probably still make it, even if they don't end up beating Auburn. The Iron Bowl's obviously important still, but yeah, I mean, I do feel like it ruins the implications and the sort of intensity of some of these like bigger matchups in the regular season to
I
expand the
think
playoff like
I
this.
think it does somewhat, and I get where you're coming from on there. Although I do think we'll see it spread out. Oddly enough, the interest in these games is going to spread out a little wider because some teams won't be necessarily obliterated from contention in the first couple of weeks just because of an inopportune loss. We'll see, I think, also some of the more edge cases in the, like, for example, this season, imagine if Iowa had somehow, if it were a 12-team playoff, imagine if Iowa had somehow upset, we really have to be hopeful here, Iowa had somehow upset Michigan. Suddenly they would actually be an outside chance of being in the playoff, which would have been a really wacky situation. I'm not sure if it would have been the best football, but it would have been interesting. I think I was kind of all for 8. 6 to me felt still a little small. I thought 8 would be nice just to at least a couple of at-larges there, but I guess 12 won the day. And at that point, I'm still wondering why I'm not a huge fan of buys entirely in the playoff system, but I get it. I mean, I don't think they're nonsense or anything like that. But I think I think we'll actually see a little bit more in terms of excitement across the board because suddenly teams that had nothing in the conversation are going to be like, if not just championship weekend, I mean, the rivalry game weekend, the week before, we're going to have, I mean, because people have pointed out, like, the Egg Bowl would have been a battle for a playoff contention for Ole Miss. They would have been absolutely, that game wouldn't have not just been the ugly Egg Bowl that we always see with two teams beating each other with clubs because that's what they like to do in the Egg Bowl. It would have been a real chance to see if we were going to get someone into that playoff spot, which Ole Miss probably would have locked down at that point. So I think it will devalue perhaps some games, but I think it's going to end up creating more interest in a broader range and perhaps making a lot more fans who may not have, who started to tune out, kind of still stay in it because there is still that chance you're going to make your way in. But I mean, again, we'll see how it plays out. That's my theory on it. I'm a little more optimistic, but that's just probably my nature. I want to apologize because I let somebody up and I totally forgot to call on them. Dr. Pepper Bucko. I saw you raise your hand and I realized, and I felt so guilty when I realized I'd accidentally skipped over you. What's on your mind?
Hey, so I was thinking of a question, but to get to Gamecock Superman, to be honest, what wasn't it supposed to be like the 4 best teams, right? Like I get it, but like let's be honest here, Florida State probably would have got blown out by probably Washington or like whatever other team.
I
But
agree. I do agree with that, but at a principle, I don't think you can leave Florida State out because if you're going to put Bama in, you have to recognize the head-to-head win that they had earlier in the season over Alabama. I think it has to be the 3 undefeated Power 5 champions plus Texas, and then you leave
yeah,
Bama and Georgia out.
yeah, that's fair. But onto one of my questions. So like I've heard you already talked about the transfer portal and like what was it like it tripled or like doubled or something
It's
and
definitely
like
gone up
transfers.
substantially. It's definitely gone up substantially
Yeah,
since last year. I don't know the exact. I don't think we'll quite know the exact percentage for a couple of days because the compliance departments have like 48 hours to actually fill out all the paperwork. But yeah, it's going to
yeah,
be definitely higher
yeah,
than last year.
yeah. But my bad. So but yeah, like amount of people transferring, I just like, it's insane. Like even my own Panthers, they lost 12. Last time I checked, 12 players in like the first week of the transfer portal, which most of them were on defense, but like also like the opportunities, like think about it, like all like the transfers that go into the transfer portal trying to find a team, like, yeah, I could determine seasons. Like, well, my Panthers, and now they're trying to find another transfer quarterback, which, yeah, they've done that 3 times already, which all of them struck out. But what is like your perspective, like, again on it, I guess, but
Just
like,
generally on the portal?
yeah,
You know,
like the
I
amount of also people.
Oh no, go ahead. Sorry, finish your thought. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, but like in my opinion, like also like think of like JT Daniels, the guy that like just retired for like medical reasons. He transferred a couple schools, right?
Like 4 schools. Yeah, he was on USC,
4 schools.
Georgia.
Yeah, USC, Georgia,
West Virginia, Rice. He'd been on, and now he wants to be a coach. And I was like, there have been coaches who have coached at fewer schools than he's played at.
Yeah, but
there's also coaches that have been coaching longer that have moved programs fewer times.
Yeah, it's just that. Yeah. Sorry, that number just I still can't get over that one. That like him. Yeah, thanks, coach, on that one, by the way. But yeah, no, I just want to say I think I get the portal. I'm kind of, I mean, I feel like it helps players a lot more on the net. I mean, it's got negatives to it. I absolutely agree, and we've seen some interesting examples of folks who keep just sort of working their way through it. But at the very least, for some of the players who get stuck, and I mean, to be clear, a lot of the guys entering the portal right now, they're not necessarily, we're not talking like top tier talent. There's sometimes folks who may not have even played a meaningful down for the team they're at. They're just looking to play meaningful down anywhere. And you sympathize with them, but yeah, no, at the same time though, you got some, I mean, I still can't believe Kyle McCord entered the portal. I mean, I kind of get it, but I mean, there must have been a really interesting conversation in Ohio State where he got the vibe that we're looking for your replacement right now. So he ended up, he's in the portal, we'll see how he does somewhere. I don't think he's going to necessarily have the same interest as a hypothetical Cam Ward, only because I wouldn't be surprised if he just goes in the NFL, or Will Howard. Dylan Gabriel is now in the, we'll see where some of these guys land. But it's interesting, and I don't know. I mean, the ability to build teams. I mean, think about it. We got Marvin Harrison Jr. made the finalists of the Heisman this year. That was kind of a pleasant surprise. I thought it was just going to be 3 finalists, and all 3 of the quarterbacks are transfer guys. I mean, all were at one point in the Pac, either in or from the Pac-12. I mean, we've got the presumed winner of the Heisman, and I think he is going to win. He went to LSU from Arizona State, and you got Bo Nix from Auburn, and you got former Indiana quarterback Penix. So it's an interesting situation there, and you kind of get why these guys are constantly looking, because I mean, the previous year Caleb Williams was like the poster child for making that work. Of course, too bad the rest of the team sucks at USC this particular last season, but it is what it is. Hey, Ski Mask Murphy, I see your hand up.
Oh, yes. Staying on topic, but still going back to Coach Clark's point, and sort of that the 14 playoff, with it being so small, sort of ruined things a little bit, sort of concentrated power of which teams got attention, in a sense, because that sort of was leading to all of this sort of transfer madness. And sort of before, when it was just the BCS, and even sort of more when it was just sort of the poll era, where it was sort of, you wanted to be on a team that would make one of the big bowl games, because you knew that's where the attention would be. So you sort of knew there was like competition within each conferences and some of the smaller conferences, a few select schools. But once it got to 4, it sort of just concentrated like there's select teams that actually have a chance to be there, and those are the only ones that get attention. And I sort of see that sort of like cycling through the transport. It's sort of like you got the guys where it's like a Cal McCord, where it's like, you're at the big school. Then once the big school realizes you're not their guy, you have to leave to go to a smaller school, which the school is just looking to pay you with hopes of like, hey, maybe he can revitalize his team, get us competitive. Then it doesn't happen there. Then he ends up at a third school. I mean, it's to the point where JT Daniels and Tate Martell should probably start a podcast about quarterbacks who don't work out and go through the whole gambit. And then you got the guys like Jaden Daniels, where he sort of was raising up Arizona State his freshman year with Herm Edwards. Then it's sort of like everybody sort of immediately got the feeling like, oh, this kid's actually good as a true freshman. We know he's going somewhere else to one of the teams that could win a title. Even though Arizona State realistically they could build the program to be very competitive, but it's sort of like in the 14 playoff sort of made it like, no, there's a short list of schools where it's gonna be. But I think Coach maybe looking for brighter days with the 12-team playoff, and that there's gonna be more schools that everyone's gonna pay attention to because you want to see there's going to be more games and more teams who are going to be vying for those 12 spots instead of just realistically, I would say these days it's like about halfway through the season, it's like 10 schools that are realistically being placed in those 4 spots. But with 12, it could easily be like 30 to 40 schools we should still pay attention to. That's just how I feel.
You know, on a lighter note, I was just thinking one of my favorite transfer stories is Tyler Buchner has entered the NCAA transfer portal, but not for football. He entered for men's lacrosse. So he's going to finish the season as a backup quarterback at Alabama because, of course, he did start one game and it didn't go so great for the I mean, they won, but it was a tough game for Alabama earlier on in the season. Of course, he transferred in from Notre Dame with his former offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees. But now he's going to head back to Notre Dame, it sounds like, to complete his lacrosse career. That dude has been able to say he started a game at Notre Dame football, Alabama football, and then, you know, finishes out wherever he decides to play lacrosse. Maybe he'll go to like Johns Hopkins or one of these top schools in lacrosse. But that was one of my favorite transfer portal stories, only because, man, that's just someone who's just got raw athletic talent. And even if it didn't come together as a football starter, I mean, that's unassailable. You know, there's one other person I saw here. I wanted to let him up, and then we'll go back to Coach. Jason Fan, what's going on? Oh, hey, Jason Fan, if you can, hit unmute. Otherwise, let's see here. Coach, what's going on? We can hear from you, and then and if we need to, Jason can just, yeah.
Here's my 2 bits on the portal. It's crazy because they've just let it run wild. I think they got a 45-day window. I'm not off the top of my head. I'd be encouraging that. And there's good and bad from the portal. It's a double-edged knife. You know, for one, you know, we as coaches have to be better people because of it. I've always, as a recruiter, I've never BS'd a kid. I'm the same guy recruiting him as when I'm going to be coaching him. I'm not going to, you know, the days of Woody Hayes recruiting guys not to go play for Bo Schembechler and ride Pine are long gone. And that being said, too, you know, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Like, you know, most teenage boys want to go to the show. And so we had a kid, you know, named Jordan McCarty, wins a state title at Silverton High here in Oregon, goes out to Colorado Springs to place for Coach Calhoun. And after playing there, you know, probably academy life isn't for me. And, you know, Monmouth, Oregon is a heck of a lot closer to Silverton than Colorado Springs. And so, you know, we recruited him out of high school. It's like, all right, yeah, we'll take you on board. You know, great. That's why the portal should exist. But that being said, there's things, you know, bigger's not always better, and the grass ain't always greener on the other side.
Yeah, you don't. It does take away what used to have to be what sometimes felt like a necessary attempt to overstate like a family illness or something. Remember that used to be at like an exception to a transfer just so that someone could go because someone was ill in the family and they could be closer to home. And I'm sure those were genuine, at least most of them were, but there were times where honestly you'd hear that one and the whole scenario around the player felt a little bit disingenuous on it. But the portal does allow that without, you know, going into those situations.
And we,
you know, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Bob. So, well, we've only really taken a few kids from the portal. For one, we as a Division 2, and, you know, not being fully funded, we've only had a couple guys we've really brought in from that. And I'll say this too, you know, when I'm crunching numbers I think I enjoy, you know, talking to the junior JUCO players a little more because there's a lot of them, and some of them are pretty talented. You still see guys that sign D1 and get D1 offers, but it's not near as frequent. So we have when it comes to the California junior colleges, we really have our cream of the crop being one of 2 D2s left on the West Coast. But what I will say the portal might it's not a replacement for the relationships you have with high school coaches. You're going to see it. You might have seen a little bit of it. I don't know off the top of my head, but you're going to see one program where they recruit 0 high school players, from the freshman class. It's all transfer portal pirates, right? And it's going to be the most talented team ever assembled, but it is going to be dysfunction junction. It'll be just about as bad as the death penalty at SMU back in '88, I think.
It reminds me of some of the complaints, again, prior to the portal, where you have JUCO-heavy teams. I know, for example, I believe, I forgot the coach, but it was at Texas State. That was kind of how they were operating for a while. And it didn't quite pan out because they were trying to build, experience in a hurry. And that was the old way you do it, although not a popular method with all coaches for a lot of reasons, to go that heavy into it. And it's ironic, too, because actually G.J. Kinney, who took over at Texas State this season and then has them in their first bowl as an FBS program ever, they're playing Rice in Dallas this for the holidays. But they were actually the second most transfer portal heavy team. They had, I believe, somewhere in the 40 range of players, which was second to, the problem is Colorado was so far ahead of them that they kind of were able to operate quietly and on the side, like, hey, pay no attention to the Bobcats. Everyone look at Colorado.
What Coach Grimes going on is a little bit different. That's year one, and it was, I played NAIA ball, and Tabor College was like that my first year when Coach Gardner came back, and was trying to rebuild his tower of power. There were only 20, 30-something guys in there that from the previous season in those abominable spring workouts. I would just be a little bit concerned if they were bringing in, if that many transfers were coming and going year 3 or 4. That's my 2 bits.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm going to slowly start wrapping this up. We're at right now about an hour and 38 minutes in. A couple of thoughts, before I forget, one of the cooler things I always enjoy, I'm an architecture buff. So USF, South Florida, has revealed renderings of their on-campus stadium. They were using kind of a placeholder for a while. They hired that Kansas City-based architecture firm, Populous, who has designed literally over 1,000 sports venues. They've been around forever. They used to be called HOK Sport. They were a spinoff of the larger firm, and then they renamed themselves Populous some while back. I'm old enough to remember when they had the old name, but they're the guys that designed the Colorado State Stadium canvas in Fort Collins. They designed I think it's Protective Field. I always forget the name of it, but UAB's new stadium. They designed McLean, which is Baylor Stadium. They've done a good job at designing. So the renderings of what USF is planning looks pretty nice. It's going to be on campus, so they're no longer playing where the Bucks play in the NFL. It's not like crazy fancy, but it's neat to see it because, again, their budget's a little more modest, but it'll be a nice venue for them and maybe help the Bulls along as they try to, I hate to say it, keep up with their old rivals at UCF. It was interesting to see some of the responses to what Charlie Baker proposed with the NCAA. Just kind of reiterate that the NCAA, in response to all the litigation and all the things that's coming up, has decided to propose a new level of the division, basically a division above Division I, which will have institutions with basically the wealthiest institutions, so they can directly compensate athletes through, quote, an enhanced educational trust fund. Again, doing everything they can to avoid the word employee. It would require schools that opt in to make an investment of at least $30,000 per year per athlete for at least half of a school's eligible athletes. And because they would have to also adhere to Title IX, that means it could be a boon for some women's sports. Let's be very clear about that. There's going to be some women's sports that are going to get incredible windfalls from this. But some schools are going to be in an interesting situation, especially if you have a lot of sports and a lot of non-revenue sports, which tend to be everything other than men's basketball and football, and even then, so not all of them are as profitable. A couple of schools have some hockey that's successful. A couple of schools, women's basketball can pull in some money, but the football is obviously where all the money really is. Now, as someone pointed out, Stanford and a couple of other of these schools have like 900 athletes, while there are FBS programs that in total have 300 or 400 athletes. So think about it doesn't take. I mean, I'm not a great math person, but $450 versus, 200 in terms of $30,000 per athlete per year. That's going to be a huge outlay for some of these programs that are going to have to make some interesting choices if they decide to try and move up to that level. Again, a lot of this stuff is still in the early stages. It was the initial proposal, which I'm sure the wheels of the NCAA will turn pretty slowly because there's so many levels of it, and academics like to drag their feet. Although they are trying to keep ahead of all that litigation that's going on. It's not going to necessarily negate the litigation that's going on, but it's going to answer some of the questions that have been posed to them. And again, looking at some of the analysis by some of the sports law minds who I deeply respect, it does seem to give them at least some footing where they could credibly defend their plan under antitrust law, because it seems to have been drafted to get around it. So much other things are going on. My goodness, we've touched on so many topics this evening. We're going to go ahead and start wrapping this up. I can't wait to see what happens in the next week. It theoretically should start calming down a little bit, right? I think the next week we'll hopefully get a couple of more spots in the coaching carousel finalized. By the way, I don't think it's officially happened, but I know the most recent one is New Mexico's apparently going to go the free agent route and bring Bronco Mendenhall out of retirement, the former BYU/Virginia head coach, to be their next head coach. It reminds me of when they pulled up, Notre Dame's old coach. I just always felt like New Mexico's a place that, actually New Mexico State needed a former head coach that was willing to kind of just, be patient and make it work out. So looking forward to seeing if that finalizes and who else is up there. But so many more things going up. Maybe we'll have an idea where some of these portal players are next week. But on behalf of all of us at our CFB, I'm Bobak Ha'Eri. It's always great hearing from you, hearing your thoughts on college football. This was our CFB Talk 169. I just wanted to thank you all. And now I'm going to hang up and listen.